Hello and welcome to Sarvatra. The partition of India in 1947 was one of, if not the most senseless, mindless and pointless events brought about by mankind. I say this not because around 2 million people lost their lives and 14 million were displaced as a result of it. I also don't say this simply because all this was not the result of an actual war or even a conflict. I instead say this because I see no justification or rationale behind this event. The proponents of the two-nation theory would argue that there were irreconcilable differences between the native Hindus who formed a majority of the population and the Muslims who formed a sizable, a rather large minority. They would further go on to add that whilst these two communities shared common history, culture and language, their religions were at odds with one another to such an extent that one's heroes were considered in many a case villains of the others and vice versa. The way I look at it is that there was a group of people from one particular community who could not imagine living as equals with those of the other communities who lived in this region. And therefore, they went on to demand for a separate nation. Now, this lack of imagination was despite the fact that for over a millennia, the two major communities that we spoke of lived and coexisted rather peacefully. So no, this was not a nation that was made because people somewhere who did originally call this place their home were being gassed in concentration camps and kicked out of what they thought was their new home, and they needed some place to live in. No, this was not Israel. Today, on the 16th of December, India celebrates Vijay Diwas to commemorate its astounding and brilliant victory over Pakistan in the 1971 Indo-Pakistan War. I feel really proud to say that my father, my uncle and my granduncle all served and fought in this war. My father and my granduncle were on the Western Front. My father was in Fazil, my granduncle was in Rajouri, whilst my uncle served both in the Western and the Eastern fronts. He was there in Faridkot and somewhere in what is Bangladesh today. Every year, this day is very, very special for me. Who can forget this iconic photograph? This photograph that captures one of Indian Army's finest moments post, or perhaps the finest moment post-independence. This war, which is also referred to as the war for the liberation of Bangladesh, was a swift and a decisive war that resulted in the dismemberment of Pakistan, where what was East Pakistan was severed away from the Union. Not just that, it also resulted in the birth of Bangladesh, that is proud of its Indic roots and heritage and language, whilst at the same time ranks far higher in all developmental indices and matrices that a nation should be proud of when compared to Pakistan. What is oftentimes missed out or overlooked is that this war was the final nail in the coffin of the so-called two-nation theory. It relegated what was left of Pakistan to effectively becoming a schizophrenic country, one where there was now no real unifying national identity anymore. In this country, and I'm being really charitable here, calling it a country, the erstwhile Indians spoke a language that was not theirs. Indeed, Urdu is not the mother tongue of a majority of Pakistanis. They denied their local roots and heritage that was tied to this land, and now, ever more vociferously than before, tried making their case for nationhood based on their diverse population having Islam, the religion, as a common minimum denominator. One can only imagine how amusing this must be if you were to watch this spectacle from across the border in Afghanistan or Iran. How would that conversation go? Let's just humor ourselves a bit. So Pakistanis, who exactly are you? We were part of India, but then we went on to become a nation of our own because, you know, we are Muslim. You're Muslim, and so you have your own nation. Why are you and us not the same nation? Well, because, we were from the subcontinent. Right, so you were Muslims from the subcontinent, so you have your own nation. But then do tell us, please, why do you have an equal number, almost equal number of Muslims living in the modern nation of India and an equal number of Muslims living in what is today Bangladesh? They're all from the subcontinent. They have Muslims there. But why are you one nation? And by the way, why do you speak Urdu, which is not even the language of most of your people? Anyway, thanks to this war in 1971, Pakistan, then on, was never able to successfully sell the idea of its nationhood to its own people. I mean, let alone the world. It could never sell it to its own people. The famous slogan from the 1940s, at the time of the conception of Pakistan, was Pakistan ka matlab kya? La ilaha illallah. It translated, what does Pakistan mean? It means there is no God but Allah. The last I checked, La ilaha illallah and the rest of the Shahada is written in the flags of multiple nations where they have a Muslim majority, and somehow they don't call themselves Pakistan. That says a lot about the two-nation theory. This war was a just war. It was a war where Indians rose up to the occasion to save the Bengalis, the local Bengalis who were being persecuted in what was East Pakistan. Pakistan, through its army, had carried out an ethnic cleansing in what is today Bangladesh, a genocide. It's in fact called the genocide of 1971, where, as per some estimates, up to 3 million people were massacred. Mostly Hindu, but then there were a lot of Muslims also. Of course, the wrong kind of Muslims. The Muslims who spoke Bengali, who considered Bengali to be their language. Whilst Pakistan and its army and the Razakars engaged in wholesale genocide in what is today Bangladesh, and whilst for that very reason we rightly label the villains like A.A.K. Niazi, Tika Khan as the butchers of Bangladesh, the butchers of Dhaka, there were those rare instances where the people from Pakistan, including those from the army, including the senior leadership, did what was right, despite the circumstances, without betraying their country. In fact, they fought more for their country than these people who were actually indulging in this genocide. While we rightly celebrate our heroes like Field Marshal Manekshaw, General J.F.R. Jacob, General J.S. Arora, General Sagat Singh, and all those who fought in 1971 as a part of the Indian Army or the Mukti Bahini. We rightly celebrate them. Let's also take a moment to acknowledge the heroism of those on the side of Pakistan who did the right thing. I'm going to talk about a Pakistani who never surrendered in this war. Initially commissioned in the Rajput Regiment of the British Indian Army and later transferred to the Punjab Regiment of the Pakistan Army, the Jammu Hussain Malik was a Punjabi from Jhelum in what is today Pakistani Punjab. He would later, as a YO or a young officer, find himself in Chittagong in what was East Pakistan. In his own words, it was a wonderful experience. The East Pakistanis treated us with love and affection. I had developed a great liking for those people. I wish those feelings had continued, but it was our own fault. We treated them as blacks were treated in the United States of America. We considered East Pakistan as our colony. We had to pay dearly for our follies 25 years later. Now, fast forward a couple of years, the Jammu Hussain Malik, who by now was a veteran of the 1947 war and the 65 war with India, now found himself in a cushy job in Rawalpindi in the GHQ. He gave it up because his nation now was at war again with India, and he took command of the 203 Infantry Brigade that was based in Hilly, Bogra. Now, he found himself surrounded by a numerically superior force made up of a whole division of the Indian Army and a brigade strength of the Mukti Bahini, freedom fighters from Bangladesh. He was part of what is famously known as the Battle of Hilly, one of the most important battles of the 71 war. Even on the 16th of December, the day when the Eastern Command of the Pakistan Army went on to shamelessly surrender. Yeah, that photo again. On this day, Bogra, the town where Malik was stationed, was completely surrounded by the Indians and the Mukti Bahini. Now they were closing in. His brigade major, along with some of his troops, went on to also go and formally surrender to the Indians, but Malik would have none of it. He went and told his troops to split up and engage in guerrilla warfare against the Indians. And not just that, there are accounts of him driving across the town with his flag and his 2 stars clearly visible. This is something that you never do in war, simply because you don't want to find yourself in the crosshairs of a sniper who's just waiting to take down a senior military officer of the enemy. But Malik did it to ensure that his troops saw him conspicuously there, motivating them. And he went on, he kept the fight on until on the 16th, when he was now driving in a jeep along with his orderly. The jeep was ambushed by the Mukti Bahini, and the Mukti Bahini took him prisoner. They tortured him, broke his arms, split his head open, and he still wouldn't surrender. He was in a state of semi-consciousness in an Indian hospital. So this was on the 16th, the day that the Eastern Command in Dhaka surrendered to the Indians. That picture again, shamefully. Malik still wouldn't surrender. His troops, many of them had surrendered, like I said. The brigade major had surrendered. This photo here. Then came the 17th, where Pakistan unilaterally agreed to a ceasefire, and that was the formal end of hostilities. He still didn't surrender. It took the flying in of Major General Nazar Hussain Shah from the nearby town of Natore, who came, relieved Malik of his command, and finally effected the formal surrender on the 18th of December, a good 2 days after the Eastern Command fell. Talk about a badass. After the war, most of the senior leadership of the Pakistan Army found themselves being court-martialed, and as a result either being cashiered or demoted, or perhaps both, their ranks stripped. Malik rightfully was promoted to Major General. Sadly, a few years later, he was forced to retire by the then military dictator, General Zia-ul-Haq. The reason Zia asked him to, or forced him to retire, was because a plot had been unearthed where Malik was planning to overthrow Zia in a coup d'etat. And he was in prison until that fateful day when Zia died in a plane crash. After that, his rank and his honors were restored. Now, in Malik's own words, Zia was an incompetent and a low-grade officer. Friends, General Tajammul Hussain Malik is definitely deserving of our respect as an honorable adversary. He's also, may I say, one of the very few and rare cases where you find a Pakistani general who has a real spine. With that, I'll leave you wishing you a very happy and proud Vijay Divas. Jai Hind.